when Stop Asian Hate became a hashtag, it seemed like a lot of members of the Asian community expected Black people to be immediately on that and be out in the front and be fighting for Asian rights. But where were the majority of Asians when Black Lives Matter was happening?
Mm-hmm.
They weren't doing it, so why are they expecting it? When something is discovered first in Africa, suddenly people are like attacking the Black community. And it's like, no, just because a disease was discovered somewhere doesn't mean that that's like what? That has nothing to do with the people. Amongst Japanese people, especially the older generation, Southeast Asians and South Asians are looked at as like less. So it's a major form of colorism.
Ato, welcome to the show. You are an openly genderqueer Japanese entertainer and activist known by your on-stage persona, AtJap13. You grew up in a very racist and homophobic community you had mentioned, which inspired you to fight harder against racism, homophobia, and bigotry. I'm excited to hear about your story. And today we're going to be talking about East Asians in entertainment, life as a queer person of color, and the relationship between Black and Asian communities. But before we go into the main course of our discussion, I want to first learn a little bit about your upbringing and your work as an activist, an artist, and an entertainer. So for my first question, what was your upbringing like, and how did those experiences actually shape your work as an artist?
I grew up in a small town where everyone was pretty much white and the same. Like I always thought when I was a kid, I would just always think, why is everything the same here? And I always felt like I stood out so much. No matter what I did, I was always like that one that stood out. And back in the 90s and early 2000s, people got away with a lot more than they do now. They still get away with it now, but it's to a much more, on a more secret level, I guess you'd say. But when I was in middle school and high school, it was terrible. Like anything gender fluid, gender non-conforming, like anything like that was just like, you were either gay or you were straight.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that was different, it was just looked at as like, whoa, that's weird. Like you need to stop that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just really difficult being different. And my mom always told me like, just don't tell anyone, don't say much. Just it's better to not create more problems. And it's better to, when you're already having an issue with one thing, it's better to just not add more attention to yourself that could be perceived as negative attention.
Mm-hmm.
So the internet was always like an escape because I could be myself more online and like build up a persona and be like, hey, this is the real me. So instead of a persona, like online is actually like my real self, but in my everyday life, I had to create like a very toned down version of myself. But when I went to Japan, that kind of changed, because I was able to express myself. Being in Tokyo, where there's so much different fashions and styles and fluidity, I was able to more discover what the true me. And when I was in high school, I gravitated towards visual K fashion because it, unlike like regular, although no matter what it was just looked at as like alternative or goth or emo or whatever, and it's like, no, it's visual K through some meaning behind it. But a small town in rural America, it's all just that emo stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So in visual K, it's androgyny, and like it's men in makeup, and when women do it, they still look like they it's androgynous, and it just fit me. So no matter what your gender is, when you express yourself through visual K fashion and music, it just is, and it felt like home. So that is one way that I really was able to express myself without standing out for what would have been, quote, the wrong reasons in 2008, 9, 10, 11. But like I had a great life at home. My mom and I are close. She always encouraged me to be myself, which is very important because a lot of kids don't have that. They also don't have a support system at home either, which is horrible. And I couldn't even imagine like with not having at least somewhere where I could feel safe and be myself. But I was always encouraged to be myself, but due to the times that I grew up in, it was just basically you just knew there was things you could do and things you couldn't do. And being any type of gender non-conforming, gender fluid, gender queer, non-binary, like any of that, you had to just no, don't talk about it. So that was my overall experience.
And did you you had mentioned before we went on camera, you had mentioned that you're currently in the United States, but you also said that you had had that moment where you uh, moved to Japan. Um, was it like something that you lived over there throughout high school? How was that sort of split up?
I After I graduated high school, I went to Japan and stayed for a while, and I met up with like Junyan and the Harajuku fashion walks, and got really into perfecting my style. And I met so many people that shared the same interest as me from different backgrounds, and that was what was surprising. Even though it's like these niche Japanese styles, when I was over there, there was so many people from all different cultures that were into the same thing as me. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, this is really cool. It's Japanese fashion does have room for diversity. And it was very eye opening for me. And
Wow.
that's when I really started working on my music. And mostly I always call it as I began in 2011, but it was probably 2013 when I really started developing an actual style and message. And the first couple years was just the pioneer years when I was just figuring stuff out.
Yeah, just
But
sort.
definitely Japan played a huge part in how I see the world now. Also coming back over here, I'm able to like compare and contrast because when you are a kid growing up in America and you look at Japanese culture and it can seem like kind of glamorized,
Mm-hmm.
and but actually living it and experiencing is different. It
Yeah.
Because being Japanese American versus being Japanese in Japan there's a huge difference there. And just being over there, like no matter what, I always say like it doesn't matter if you're Japanese American, you still stand out when you go to Japan because they still see you as American.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very different experience. So you look Japanese, so you have to blend in, but yet at the end of the day you're American, so you're going to be treated like still a foreigner.
Yeah.
So you know it's very different.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I know that even for me, when I'm Filipino American, and when I went to the Philippines, like just for a weekend, people all like you immediately knew. Like when I stepped off the plane, they were like, "Oh, okay, so you're American, right?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I came to the motherland, and they already like spotted me." But no, I mean, it's like you're absolutely right. It's being
Yeah.
a whether you're Japanese American, whether you're Asian American, like going to your sort of motherland country, like it is not the same as being from there. And as a
Hmm.
genderqueer artist who had lived in Japan, your music had covered a wide range of topics with songs titled, Quarter Life Crisis, Millennial Condition,
Hmm.
and Bound by Society. And so you
Hmm.
definitely have a lot of commentary going on. Your music has a lot of hidden and alternative meaning.
Hmm.
You also love mixing,
Hmm.
contrasting themes of like cuteness and youth, and then aesthetics that are more dark and a little bit more rebellious within your music.
Hmm.
And on your website, you also had mentioned that your overall message to your listeners is to never let society silence your voice. So my next question
Hmm.
is, outside of your music and your art, which is sort of the opportunity where you can kind of like be yourself. What have your experiences
Hmm.
been like living as a genderqueer person of color, and how have people tried to silence you at like work or school or within family or friends?
Mostly, like I said, growing up in high school and everything, like I just had to keep it quiet. I didn't talk about it. Like I knew the people that I could talk about it with, but then most of the time I just tried my best to blend in and just be. if they saw me as the emo kid, I mean, that I get that. I just go with it. Then after I came back here from being in Japan, in Japan, I blended in, everything was fine, and then I come back here and I have to face it again. The hardest time I had was when I tried to get into acting, and I was basically given a choice of like two boxes. I had to fit either this aesthetic or this aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
And the one I chose was so that because they were like basically even my hair color was off. Like it didn't go with the rest of my image. So if I wanted to keep copper hair, I had to have like this kind of image. But if I wanted more of a dark look, I had to have black hair. So I it's a lot of hard work. I'm just being honest. It's hard work getting black hair up to this color. And it was damaging for my hair. And I wasn't going to change me because they said that I had to in order to keep my clothes a certain way. So I was like, well, it's easier to change clothes than it is to change my hair color. So I'll just go with this. But for being they, them, I automatically felt this discrimination from the people that were there, and they saw the kind of clothes I wore, and it's like very androgynous, and I felt like they were just trying to push it one way or the other. Like they wanted you to either choose like, are you masculine, are you feminine?
Mm-hmm.
But I like elements of both. So I felt from the beginning I had like at least like 10 slaps against me. So in the end, I was me, and I did the best I could with what I knew, what I already felt was going against me. Like I put in the work. I probably worked harder and I memorized my stuff. Like I did the best work that I could do, but I knew in my heart that I wasn't gonna succeed the way I could have if I'd have been completely what they wanted me to be. But like I said, that's my whole message. Like I want to prove that you can be yourself, and being yourself is beautiful, and you don't have to change because someone else tells you to. So that was probably the worst experience I had, honestly. And the entertainment, this was back in 2015. Hopefully it's a little better now. I haven't had much experience with the entertainment industry since 2015, but it's ruthless. It's ruthless. And especially Hollywood and New York, like they have a type that they want you to be. So, and for the longest time it was like the straight white stereotype. But
Mm-hmm.
now that there's diversity and they know they have to include people of color, and especially when you are a person of color that is LGBTQ, I feel you have to be, if you right way, you're doing it the wrong way. And that shouldn't be that way. Everyone should be able to be their true authentic selves and be able to achieve accordingly, not based off of what someone higher up tells you to do.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine just like over the last, several years, things have definitely gotten better, but I know that it's only sort of in pockets, and
Mm-hmm.
sticking on that conversation about your art, you've been making music for 10 years, 10 plus years, which means you've seen the
Mm-hmm.
way that um, the global Asian entertainment sphere and media has really changed a lot, like in the
Mm-hmm.
last 10 years, we've seen
Mm-hmm.
a huge growth in very wealthy Korean, Chinese, and Japanese entertainment and media companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when a lot of people think about East Asian entertainment, or Asian entertainment really, they usually think of, K-pop, K-dramas, Japanese pop, anime, and
Yeah.
Chinese dramas. But on the other hand, you don't
Yes.
really hear a lot from Southeast or South Asian entertainers from like Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, or
Mm-hmm.
India. And similarly, you also don't hear a lot from independent or experimental or political artists like yourself who are offering something totally
Mm-hmm.
unique that isn't, mainstream pop music. So when you look
Yes.
at your body of work over these past several years, and you look at the way that Asian and East Asian entertainment and media has changed. Like, how do you feel about all this?
When in 2011, when I started, there was really not much Asian American artists in music. There was like actors, actresses, people like that. But aside from anime, Japan wasn't really talked about that much. And K-pop wasn't over here yet. And Chinese dramas, people weren't talking about them. So the first thing I noticed was when Psy with Gangnam Style made his viral video. Like that, I think, like got Americans and the rest of the world comfortable with the idea of East Asians as entertainers. And then when it was discovered that Psy had some very shady past with his music career, it was like he was kind of just silenced then. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, it seemed K-pop became really, really popular. And what I've noticed about the K-pop artists that make it globally, they have a similar aesthetic and style. Like they are very refined, and whereas Southeast Asians and South Asian entertainers have more of a style that is different to what we have over here. But mainstream K-pop is not much different than mainstream American pop.
Yeah.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it's Korean, but at the end of the day, it's very similar. And they're collaborating with a lot of pop artists, and it's just very similar. Same with J-pop, it's got that familiarity to it. Whereas if you get into more independent styles in whether it be in East Asian music or Southeast Asian or South Asian music, it's very different. And a lot of times the world does not take different very well, especially at first. They have to have something that's familiar in order for them to really get into it. Like I really like Darren Gray, and I feel that the only reason that Darren Gray even has any popularity over here is due to like the metal community. So like you got the metal community, your hot topic goths, like it became will like certain bands like Darren Gray and the Gazette became popular because of that subculture here. And which honestly, to see Visual K get any kind of recognition, I'm like so happy and so thrilled about it. But it's like that, it once again, it's a subculture liking another subculture. So, but that's like how those kind of things work. Like you got to have this community over here discover another version of the kind of music that they like and then bring it back over, and that's how you share and grow and discover new things. And then who knows, maybe more Asian American artists will start doing things like Visual K or incorporating some traditional music into what they make. Who knows? But overall, the East Asian music and entertainment in general that is popular here and globally seems to be very similar to any other type of pop. It's very commercialized, and that's what everybody likes, so that's what everybody makes.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. Like, I was kind of laughing because my wife and I have mentioned that before, like watching K-pop, and we're like, wow, it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's like a lot, it's like Justin Bieber,
Yeah.
like, and so there's definitely, it's like they've come up with the pop formula, and they've really just translated that into different
Mm-hmm.
cultures. But another topic that I really want
Yeah.
to go into that is sort of similar to these dynamics between these different communities. Um, is the
Mm-hmm.
topic of the disparities between various Asian ethnic groups. In the last several
Mm-hmm.
years, we had United States elected Barack Obama and then immediately elected Donald Trump as president. And so within these, 10 years, so much has changed within our politics, within our media, within our culture. And included in those changes is a growing movement of people who are openly hostile towards Black, Indigenous, Latino, and Asian people. And sort of this far right movement has definitely grown in this country. But I also know that the United States isn't the only place where these problems are growing. When you look at
Yeah.
the changing landscape over in Asia or even Japan, being there and being immersed in these scenes and in these subcultures, what changes
Mm.
did you sort of notice? What changes stood out? What things have changed either for the better or maybe for the worst?
Well, in Japan, a country that is 95% Japanese, the main immigrant population is Korean and Southeast Asian. Um, and amongst Japanese people, especially the older generation, Southeast Asians and South Asians are looked at as like less. So it's a major form of colorism that occurs within the East Asian community, and that is a huge issue. Like even makeup in Japan, you get two colors. Like it's the light or like the light medium. You don't. So even if you're a darker shade of Japanese, good luck finding something because that's what you've got. So it's just like one way seems to be very it seems to be it's a collectivist society in Japan. So like the nail that stands out gets pounded back down. So if you are like Southeast Asian or Korean, you're basically taught to be as Japanese as you possibly can because it's better to blend in than to stand out. So what I've noticed over the last 10 years is that is slowly with millennials and Gen Z, that is slowly getting less of a thing. It's becoming more okay to accept that you are not Japanese or you're half Japanese and you're half some other kind of Asian ethnicity. So I've noticed an improvement there. And like I said, when I did the fashion walks and stuff, it wasn't all Japanese. I met a lot of people from Thailand. There was someone from Cambodia, the Philippines. Like there was a huge Chinese Americans. There was a huge diverse group that at another time it would just be if you look at that Japanese fashion magazines in the 90s, they're all Japanese. But as time goes on and you see different like Harajuku fashion magazines from the 2010s, there's like people from Thailand, people from China, America, like there's all over. And there was even a girl that I met, she was from Africa. So I thought that was just the coolest thing to see that people come together through music, fashion, pop culture. And but on a business level, there is still an issue with people that come from countries outside of Japan, especially Southeast Asia, China, Korea. They don't get the same opportunities as someone that is Japanese. Um, they have to prove themselves more. Like they have to have more credentials, more education to do the same job that a Japanese person only needs a certain set of credentials to do. And I honestly don't know if that's changing because I haven't been over there for a while, but I don't know if that's changing. I like to hope that it is because that's something that really needs to change. When I was a teenager, I used to think that because I see that in America capitalism is bad because it's based on oppression and white supremacy and I lost my word, systemic racism and everything with how it began with slavery and everything. But in Japan, I was under this it's the glamorized phase of I was like, but in Japan, capitalism works. No, it just is it's oppressive in a different way. Instead of it being oppressive because it's different races and cultures, it's oppressive because of socioeconomic status or what kind of education you were able to get, or men versus women, heteronormative society versus LGBTQ. It's just a different way that it oppresses people. So that's one, I'm glad I was able to have that experience and see that no, no little Ato, no, you were entirely wrong. So, um, it just I have noticed that now there is more like with Naomi Osaka and with the Olympics and everything. there was a huge thing about her, people saying that she wasn't Japanese. And it's like,
I remember that.
yeah, she is. She's Japanese. She's Black Japanese. Like, that's a real thing, you know. And I always noticed it, like, they were quicker to claim white Japanese mix, any person of color Japanese mix. Like that seemed to be something that it's like have to, if the European and Japanese, it's like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's like the standard of beauty without makeup. But then it's like any person of color plus Japanese, it's like you're not Japanese, you're Filipino, or you're Black, or you're whatever ethnicity you are for the other side. And but no, you're Japanese. And so I'm glad that Japan was forced to have to look at themselves a little bit with that one. And she's loud about it. And I think that's the greatest thing. Like, that's how you need to be. Like, she needs to be loud and proud of who she is.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I totally remember that, and I remember there was also that. I think there was like a couple years ago. There was the half black, half Japanese Miss Japan, or there's some sort of like beauty pageant.
Yes.
And it was sort of a similar thing, right?
Yeah, they said she couldn't be Miss Japan because she wasn't Japanese. And it's like, wait, yes, she is.
Yeah.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, and
what do you mean she can't be?
And I'm glad that you really brought up that whole dynamic about how there's this bias towards thinking that half Japanese people who are half white, there's just this automatic like, oh wow, you're the beauty standard, whereas the treatment for people who are half black is like totally different. And sort of staying on that topic of, again, race relations, I want to focus now, even a little bit more narrowly and specifically on the relationship between Asian and Black communities within these cultures. As an activist and an artist who isn't afraid to talk about these things, like, how do you feel about the race relations between Asian and Black people, either in the United States or specifically in Japan? And what do you think, and in your experience, what does that solidarity and more of the positive side, what does that look like over in Japan?
Okay, so in Japan, what I've noticed is they still put out ads. A while back, someone showed me a cartoon that was like a very racist stereotype of Black people, and the Japanese and like media likes to use the excuse that, well, they don't know because like they don't have a huge Black population there. And it's like, no, it's 2021, you can't use that excuse anymore. And that's never an excuse to begin with, because you should, before you actually go through making a cartoon is a hard process, and before you go through the process of making a cartoon about something with good intentions, you need to actually make a cartoon that has a good message, not just be like, well, we tried to make a good message, we just didn't know any better. And it's like, no, you had the time to do the work to make something that actually would have been something good, but instead you were lazy and based it off of stereotypes and just felt that everyone should just accept it because you're Japan and you're not like America in that way. So that's the major thing I noticed about Japanese media. And Japanese media, especially like NHK and a lot of the major broadcasts, base a lot of the comedy and shows off of stereotypes. And that is something that, once again, they need to stop trying to use the excuse of, but we're Japan, we don't have that community, so we don't know. Well, it's like I said, you have the internet, you have access to and see people and what they actually look like and what they do, not base it off of some stereotype that was printed and propaganda that was put out during segregation. So a lot of the stereotypes that they have also is based off of a time when there was segregation and there was racial propaganda, and over here it was like blackface was okay. And so like those still people in Japan that think blackface is okay because it's not out of a racist place because they didn't have that happen over there. And it's like, no, no, it's bad everywhere. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you can't do that. But they that's the main thing I've noticed in Japan. They need to look at themselves a little harder and just admit. It's like, just admit you're wrong. Apologize, because Japan apologizes when they do finally admit that they're wrong. They do apologize because Japanese culture as a whole likes to apologize for everything that they feel they've done wrong, but they need to admit the guilt. They need to admit that they did wrong. And that's another thing I've noticed, that a lot of times in Japanese culture, it's better to like ignore the problem, pretend it didn't happen, rather than to face it and actually apologize for it. So in Japan, that's what I've noticed. In the United States, especially since COVID, there has been an uprise in not just white people, but also Black people attacking members of the Asian community. Um, and but on the other side, there's always been, especially East Asians, that have been very a very strong hatred and animosity against Black people. So, and it's like, you can't make one worse than the other, but you have to admit that both of those things are wrong. So it's like, you're both being racist, but in different ways, and it comes from a different place. Um, the Asian community has not been good to the Black community. Like, I see things, and it's just not. For years, with white society viewing Asians as the model minority, it's like a lot of what I see, especially in like the higher up of socioeconomic status, it seems like a lot of Asian Americans just develop the same oppressive mentality towards other people of color. It's like they, to be accepted, it's the collectivist mentality, but all wrong, like for all the wrong reasons. Like, they go along with stuff, and then it just perpetuates very harmful stereotypes, racism, harassment, anything that can become of that type of mentality. It happens. And then then you also have um, members of the Asian community that think it's like okay to say the N word or something because of people of color. And it's like, no, you can't say that. You're Asian, shut up. So it's just, I've noticed both of those. Like, they think it's okay because they got friends or they listen to hip hop or whatever, and because they're not white, then they can say it. And it's like, no, no, you can't. It don't work that way. And so you got the Asian community members that are the model minority and like falling into that and just going along with the oppression. And then you have colorism that has always been a thing in especially East Asian cultures, but even in Southeast Asia, like skin bleaching and
Oh
lightening
yeah.
creams and wanting to be as close to the European beauty standard or the white aesthetic as possible. And it's not even about the European beauty standard in many of these cultures. It is literally that they just want to be liked, because being light was thought of at one time as being like higher, more wealth, because you didn't have to go outside and work. So if you were darker, that meant that you didn't have as much because you had to work in the fields or whatever. And I think there's a lot of cultures in the world that believe that same way, where it's like if you were lighter, that meant you were inside, and if you were darker, that meant you had to work outside. So there's color, and then you have, like I said, the members of the Asian community that think they're not racist, but they're like doing things that are racist, like saying the N word because they think they can, or wearing certain styles because they think they can.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I've noticed that. But when Stop Asian Hate became a hashtag, it seemed like a lot of members of the Asian community expected Black people to be immediately on that and be out in the front and be fighting for Asian rights. But where were the majority of Asians when Black Lives Matter was happening?
Mm-hmm.
They weren't
Exactly.
they weren't doing it, so why are they expecting it? So that's a major, that's something I really noticed. Like, if you didn't do anything, then why do you expect them to do something like right immediately? And of course, there are a lot of Black people that have been at the forefront of Stop Asian Hate. And of course, there are Asians that were at the front of Black Lives Matter, like trying to be in solidarity and how about, but it wasn't the majority.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was not the majority. Um, it was a small amount of people. But if you reverse it, I've noticed there are far more Black people that are with Asians than there were the other way around. So that's another thing. Like, to move towards solidarity, you have to like there has to be a match in the feelings, and you have to let at some point the race relations between Black and Asian, some small things, like, I think you have to like look at yourself and admit you both have some unpackaging to do of some very outdated and racist and oppressive feelings. And from both sides, I think there's work to be done, but you can't keep blaming, like, you can't keep just going at each other when there's a much bigger problem going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I always say, we're stronger together.
Yeah.
And that's like what we need to do, is be stronger together and fight, because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. So it's like we just have different journeys, different stories to get to this place, but we all want the same thing. And like, it's just, you have to see through each other's eyes and just stronger together.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I'm glad that you had, a very in-depth and nuanced sort of outlook on this, because, you're absolutely right. Like, the, gosh, I knew that when the Stop Asian Hate sort of movement was going on, I knew that reaction was going to happen, that there were a bunch of Asian people who were going to come out of the woodwork and be like, well, I changed my profile picture to a black square, and they were real, like you said, like, they had a feeling of entitlement, like, Black people, you owe us this, as if they were, again, matching that energy, which they weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that really integral to this conversation and within this dynamic. And for my last question, actually, again, I want to go even a little bit deeper onto the subject of race relations between Black and Asian people, and talk specifically about the way that oftentimes non-Asian or non-Black, and in particular white people, will weaponize Asian people so they can then project their racist feelings onto Black and brown people. So you can see this happen when white folks will tell Black people, like, oh, hey, racism doesn't exist because, Asians are also a minority and they're successful. And, obviously this is incredibly racist. And it's an example of how white people can use and weaponize Asian identities to drive a wedge between Black and Asian people and to silence Black people. And this all connects around this idea of not being the model minority, not your model minority. And this has been another, growing movement, sort of adjacent to, and almost sort of like a response to some of the racist versions of people, adopting the Stop Asian Hate thing. There are a lot of people who have been sort of identifying with the not your model minority movement, because there are Asians who are just speaking up about not wanting to be that wedge, not wanting to, like, feel like they can talk about what's happening to the Asian community without putting down other marginalized communities. And so for you, how do you feel like other Japanese folks feel about this not your model minority thing? Like, do they believe in the model minority myth? Are they contesting with it? And how are you sort of feeling about it?
From my point of view, it's definitely like a thing. Like, For years, like you said, white people would say like, well, Asians are successful, then why can't you be? Because most of, like, a lot of them are immigrants, like first generation, and look how well they're doing. And it's like, a lot of times, for whatever reason, from the beginning, um, Asians were given like a little bit more of a, almost like they were given like a little bit of something. I don't know what to call it, but like a little bit of something, because they're, for whatever reason. Whereas a lot of other members of the Black and Brown community, they were like kept poor. Like slavery ended, but then segregation happened, and then like segregation ended, but then there was still systemic racism everywhere, and the education system, and no access to health care or a means to get a job that would actually help you to afford the standard of living that you just need to survive and eventually thrive. So, whereas in the Asian community, they're not coming from the same background. There's Japanese internment camps, but they got reparations, not enough, but got reparations. And then there was the Chinese on the railroad, and like they got some reparations, not enough, but they got something. So they were given a little bit of something as a means to enter into American society. Even though I always call it like you're standing on the line. You're not inside, but you're not totally on the outside. You're just like on the fence. And it can go either way. The moment you do something, like when COVID happened, the moment something happens, you're blamed for it, you're back out again. But, if you make a business a lot of money, and oh, come on in, like we love you. This one's a good one. That's like, in my mind, like that's how I picture it. It's just, you're just on the fence, and it's like you do something wrong. If you do it right, oh, come on in. You're one of us. So, and like you said, they use that against Black and Brown communities. Like, well, why can't you be like this one? Like, well, Asians are doing well, so it must be a you problem. When they were never given a chance. Like a lot of just people, if you're not given a chance, it's very hard. You have to survive, and to get basic human needs, you have to do what you got to do. And a lot of times, if you're getting like assistance, or you're working like a minimum wage job or something, it's looked at as like, oh, well, you're not trying to better yourself. You're lazy. And it's like, no, it's just that how am I going to get an education if I can't afford food? Like, so it's, and then that definitely divided the Asian community from Black and Brown communities. It just, and then with how Asia behaves sometimes, on top of it, it's like, and I know that a lot of times African immigrants in Asian countries are not treated that well, due to colorism and various different reasons. That all goes together to create some very negative feelings from the Black community towards especially East Asians, because even amongst the Asian community, like East Asians are always held like, it seems, up here more, because I always say it's because they're like closer to the European ideal, but for whatever reason, it seems like they're up here, and then like Southeast Asians are like in the middle, and then like anyone from South Asia, they're not even considered as Asians. When people say the Asian American community, they're not talking about people from India. They're just talking about mostly China, Korea, Japan. Like that's what everybody talks about. Maybe sometimes like Thailand and the Philippines, but it's just, there's a lot of erasure of so many different cultures and identities, that then when it comes to the whole East Asian versus the Black and Brown community, a lot of times they're not even claimed as people of color, because they're not treated the same way as other people of color are treated. But like with COVID, or when something bad happens, then you see like where it really is, and it's like, nope, You're not one of us either. You're over there still. Just don't think you're not. We just like you a little better. It just a lot of people's true feelings, I think, were came out with when COVID,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people act like, oh, I'm not racist, or at least they act like they're not racist against Asian people, but then all of a sudden they're like blaming all Asians because COVID was discovered first in China. And it's like, just like when something is discovered first in Africa, suddenly people are like attacking the black community. And it's like, no, just because a disease was discovered somewhere doesn't mean that that's like what? That has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with the people. And it just a lot of truths were revealed, I think, in the last 2 years. And the divide that has been created for years, ever since like when Europe, like when the Western world like forced Japan to open from isolationism, and Japan started like getting more of the colonialism mentality, and then they started invading Southeast Asia and Korea and China and everything. Like from there onward, like there was a huge divide created, and it just kept getting worse with everything. But now the last 2 years, I think, is starting to show both the black and brown community and the Asian community that, like, hey, wait a minute, maybe instead of being so mad at each other and thinking this thing, maybe we should work together. And just the system's broken.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to fix it if we just keep making it worse, just keep perpetuating the same ideology that was forced upon us? So that's something I've noticed.
Yeah, and you had mentioned something that I really liked, which is that idea of Asian people not only throughout history, but especially within the last several years, and especially during COVID, where you were reminded of the fact that we are on the line, like directly on that fence. And I think part of being not even just Asian American, because I always felt like sort of being in the middle was always the experience of being an Asian American. But I think that especially with COVID, um, and the responses to COVID, a lot of Asians were reminded, like, hey, in just a snap, you can be, oh, we love Asian people, their culture, to, ew, you all are bat eaters, you all started this whole thing, and so it just it was a wake up call. And I'm glad that you had highlighted that. Ato, it's honestly been a pleasure to have you on Lag Radio and to hear your story and to hear your really amazing opinions and sort of to hear you just flesh out everything in such a great way. Before we head out though, what are you working on these days, and where can the Lag community find and support you?
I am currently working on, it would be my new album set that I'm going to be releasing sometime next year. It is called Existential Decay, and I've released some of the songs online, like Quarter Life Crisis, The Millennial Condition, Dying to Be Alive. It's I call it like a visual and audio journey of like where society's headed, like where it's come from and where it's going, and like how we need to just sometimes we just need to stop and focus on what really matters and what's important, and just take that moment with yourself to just be like, okay, this is what I can do to make things better. Like, and like some of my songs are just like self-expression stuff, but then others like there's definitely a meaning even behind something that's self-expression. It's still all about the core message of always being yourself and not letting society silence your voice. So I am working on that. And usually I always have like you said, like you mentioned, like the double meaning, like the angsty teenage cute vibe, and then I contrast it with the dark reality of society and the world and everything. So, and I also touch on like mental health, and I have gone through like my fair share of bouts with depression, and that is always nuanced in some of my songs. Um, and like I put this quote on my Twitter that said, I choose to sing about the things that people aren't comfortable thinking about. So it's really, a lot of things are really a thought piece. Um, and even the musical style, like I try to combine like different experimental vibes, like alternative and visual K, but also like some, I'm very inspired by like hip hop and trip hop and the way word flow and everything. So I like to connect and bring it all back, like to have the solidarity of, because I always shout out like I hip hop and trip hop and all that stuff. Those are beautiful styles of music that the Black community created, and I believe that everyone should share in musical style and learn from each other. But you and you always should give credit to where your ideas came from and what inspires you. So that's like basically what I'm working on right now. It is more meaningful than my last two albums that I released. So I'm really excited for that.
Awesome. And where can they find and support you on social media?
I am on Reverb Nation at Jap13, SoundCloud at Jap13, Instagram, Twitter at Jap13, and then, of course, my website at Jap13.com. It has all of my music, and you can find it all easy right there. Buy it, download it, stream it, whatever you like. It's all right there.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I thought we'll definitely go ahead and link out to all your socials so people can listen to your amazing work and go ahead and follow you. All right, everybody. I hope
Thank
you
you.
enjoyed the conversation. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye.